The ward stones burned blue the moment they dragged the boy toward the threshold, and Denna knew what blue meant. She had seen it 3 times in 4 years of working the outcast camps, that cold blue light creeping up the carved granite of a banishment circle when the expulsion was sanctioned, when the pack's magic had decided the exile was complete and permanent. Blue meant the snow country on the other side of that threshold, with no pack bond, no warmth, no anchor to hold a wolf's shift in place. For an adult, banishment in blue was a death sentence carried out slowly. For a child who hadn't yet completed his first shift, she moved before she decided to. Her knees hit the stone at the threshold base. The ward energy struck her immediately, a vibrating pressure pushing against her chest like a flat hand against her sternum, and she felt it in the back of her teeth, that humming wrongness she always is felt near active ward work. She wrapped both arms around the boy and pressed him against her, his small body rigid with fever, his breathing the shallow, rapid kind that meant his wolf was trying to tear through a frame too young and too sick to hold it. "Remove her," said Warden Kellick from the elevated bench. He had the voice of a man who had been obeyed his entire life. Smooth with certainty, not bothering with volume. "She is not pack. She has no standing here." "He is a child." Denna's voice came out flat and steady, which surprised her because the ward energy was doing something unpleasant to her vision, the edges of the stone hall blurring and shimmering at the margins. "He is 5 years old and he is dying. Banish him and the cold kills him inside of 6 hours. That is not justice. That is execution of a child for the crime of being born without parents." A murmur moved through the benches. Pack wolves in their formal grey and silver, comfortable in their hierarchy, watching the hedge healer on the floor with the same look they gave interesting insects, curiosity without concern. Kellick leaned forward. He was a trim man, carefully kept with the kind of steady hands that had never been forced to do anything desperate. The unclaimed child was found signs Ironhold's eastern border without authorization. Pack law is clear. He wandered in from the cold. He is 5. And is not subject to exception based on age, Kellick finished, as if she hadn't spoken. Warden's decree stands. The child crosses the threshold. The boy's fingers found her collar. He didn't speak. He never spoke. She had learned that in the 2 days since a camp contact sent word that the Ironhold patrol had picked up a small wolf child near the eastern tree line, half frozen and mid-shift. She had come as fast as she could, which was not fast enough. The ward circle was already lit when she arrived, but he held onto her collar with both fists now and his small body shook, and she could feel through that contact the frayed edge of his wolf bond, unanchored, wild, burning him from the inside. She had felt this before. She knew exactly how it ended if nothing changed. She held on. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. The sound was enormous. Old iron hinges that had probably held that door for 2 centuries, shrieking open with a concussion Denna felt in her back teeth. Every wolf in the room snapped rigid. Some dropped their heads before they'd consciously registered why. The scent hit her a half-second later, and she felt it the way she had once felt a lightning strike 20 feet away. Not the bolt itself, but the air displacement, the sudden total rearrangement of everything in range. Cedar ash and rain-soaked stone, and underneath that, something else, something that moved through her like a key finding a lock that had been rusting shut for 8 years. Her wolf, which she had kept buried so deep for so long that most days she forgot it existed, opened its eyes. She shoved it back down. Not now. Caston Ashburn, Alpha King of Ironhold and the 4 contested valleys, did not walk so much as occupy space. He was taller than the doorframe required, and used none of that height performatively. He simply moved through the room, and the room rearranged itself around him. Dark hair, dark coat, jaw that belonged on a much angrier man than his controlled expression suggested. His hands, she noticed even from the floor, were scarred across the knuckles in the layered way of someone who had fought with fists and won enough times for the scar tissue to stack up. Every wolf in the hall dropped to one knee, every wolf except Denna, who was already on the ground with her arms around a dying child. His gaze swept the room, stopped on her. The bond pulled taut between them like something had taken up all the slack in a rope. Denna felt it in her sternum, in her spine, in the sudden, impossible certainty that this man she had never seen before was somehow the answer to a question she hadn't known her body had been asking. Her wolf pushed against its cage. She pushed back harder. "What is this?" said the Alpha King. Not a question, a temperature drop. Kellic was on his feet, papers in hand. My king, a routine border matter, an unclaimed rogue pup found unauthorized inside the Eastern. "I see what it is." Caston walked forward. The wolves nearest to him pressed back against the benches, the unconscious lean of bodies responding to dominance the way plants lean from shadow. He stopped at the edge of the ward circle, looked down at the boy in Denna's arms. Something crossed his face, fast, controlled, a shutter opening and closing before anyone could read what was behind it. Whose child is this? Unclaimed, my king, no registered parent, no pack affiliation. I did not ask about affiliation, I asked whose child. Silence. Denna looked up at him. He was looking at the boy, specifically at the child's half-shifted forearms where the fur had come in before the fever broke the shift's progression. Silver-black, the color of storm clouds at the edge, a particular shading that ran from pure black at the root to pale silver at the tips. "Those are my father's markings," the Alpha King said, quietly. "Just to her, or to no one at all." The ward stones stopped humming, just stopped, as if the king's presence had pushed them into silence. Denna felt the pressure release from her chest like a fist unclenching. The boy went very still in her arms, and then slowly, incrementally, his rigid muscles began to ease, not because anything had been resolved, because Caston was close enough that his pack bond was radiating outward, and the boy's wolf, fraying, desperate, had latched onto the edge of it the way a drowning person grabs a rope thrown from shore. His fever was dropping. She could feel it through her palms. "No one takes the child," the Alpha King said. "No one moves this woman. Any order given in the last hour is suspended pending my review." He looked at Kellic with the particular patience of a man who is deciding how much to say. "Clear the hall." She woke in a room larger than the entire medic tent she'd been sleeping in for 2 years. Vaulted stone ceiling, a fireplace large enough to fit a horse, sheets that were actual linen, not the rough spun cotton she had long since stopped expecting. She lay still with her eyes closed and catalogued the way she always catalogued. Injury assessment habit, transferred to environment. Warm. Structurally warm, not just surface warm. The smell of beeswax candles and something herbal, something she would have identified as ironwort if she were in the camps, but couldn't be because ironwort only grew in. She opened her eyes. On the table beside the bed, someone had laid out a set of herbalist tools, small scissors, measuring weights, a folded square of clean linen, a glass jar holding dried ironwort stems. The boy was asleep beside her. Someone had bathed him and changed his clothes. When she pressed the back of her hand to his forehead, it was cool. "He has not moved more than 6 inches from you since they brought you in." The Alpha King was in the chair by the fire. He had changed into something simpler, dark shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbows, and there was a book open on his knee. She caught the title on the spine, a field guide to cold climate root systems, worn at the binding, the cover soft from actual use. She sat up too fast. Pain flared across her ribs where the ward energy had hit her, old bruising from an old injury, made new again. She pressed her hand against her side and breathed through it. "The banishment," she said. "Suspended permanently. Kellic has been removed from his position." A pause. He was not the first to issue that kind of order. He will not be the last, but his particular tenure is finished. She studied him across the room. The fire threw warm light across his face and softened the severity of his angles exactly enough to make him seem approachable, which she suspected was an illusion she should not trust. "You didn't have to leave the tools," she said. His expression didn't change. "You'll need them. Your kit was missing the ironwort entirely. I'd used the last of it on the road." "I know." He closed the book. "You had been traveling for 11 hours before you reached the hall. You had not eaten in approximately the same amount of time. You stood in an active banishment ward for 45 minutes before you lost consciousness." He looked at her steadily. "I am simply noting the sequence of events." Denna looked at the tools on the table. She did not know how to receive this kind of attention, careful, practical, directed at her welfare. She had been the one doing inventory and filling gaps for so long that the reversal felt like standing on a floor tilted 2 degrees off level. Enough to notice, not enough to name. "I'll leave when the boy is stable," she said. "You'll stay until you're both well." He said it the way he said everything else, not loud, not a command exactly, but with the certainty of a man who had made a decision and was simply informing the universe of it. The boy's name, she eventually decided, was Ash. He responded to it by the second day. A slight turn of the head, a pause in whatever he was doing. Not his given name, probably, if he had ever been given one. But it fit him, the color of his half-shifted fur, the quality of his silence. Ash settled into the sound like it had been waiting for him. He did not speak. Not one word. She did not know if he had language, if he had ever learned it, if it had been frightened out of him by whatever he had survived before the Ironhold patrol found him at the tree line, half frozen and shifting without anchor. He followed her everywhere. When she sat in the herb room, cataloguing the household's medical stores, he arranged himself on the floor beside her chair and watched her hands with complete absorption. When she walked the garden in the early morning, the cold air helped her think. His hand found the hem of her coat within 30 seconds. When she tried to sleep, she woke to find his small weight against her shoulder, his breathing steady and unconscious, completely certain she was a safe place to rest. Caston's household treated her with the careful politeness reserved for situations that had no precedent. She was not a servant. She was not his mate, though she could feel the bond between them vibrating at all times, like a plucked string that had not been permitted to fade. She was the woman who had been unconscious in the Alpha King's arms when they carried her in, and she was the woman the boy would not leave, and no one quite knew where to put that. The cook, an older woman named Net, solved the problem by simply feeding her. Every morning, before Denna found the kitchen consciously, there was food on the table. Eggs and dark bread and preserved apple and tea, strong enough to strip finish from wood. Net set it down without comment and looked at her the way experienced caretakers look at people who have forgotten they need caring for. Not unkind, not pitying, just accurate. Denna ate everything, every morning. On the 6th day, she found Ash in the kitchen garden with a fistful of plants he had pulled from the beds. He held them up when he saw her, expression earnest, offering. She crouched beside him. The ground was cold and damp through her trousers, and the ironwort growing along the stone wall smelled the way it always smelled, sharp and clean and faintly like the inside of an old building. She had used ironwort in 100 compresses across a dozen winters. The scent was her most reliable memory of feeling competent. "That one's ironwort," she told Ash. "See the 3-point leaf? It reduces fever and draws infection from a wound. And this one," she touched a thin-stemmed plant with small yellow flowers. "We use this for aching joints, old wolves and young pups with growing pain." Ash listened with his entire body. He leaned toward her, turned the plants over in his small hands, studied each one with those silver-grey eyes that were old in a way a 6-year-old's eyes had no business being. Then he carefully placed the ironwort in her hand and pressed her fingers closed around it. She held the plant and said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. "You've been teaching him." The Alpha King's voice came from the garden gate. She had felt him before she heard him. The bond functioned as a low, constant awareness, a kind of peripheral sense that told her where he was with the same unconscious reliability as knowing where her own hands were. She had stopped being startled by it. She had not stopped being unsettled by it. "I'm telling him about plants," she said. "Whether he understands is a different question." "He understands." Caston walked into the garden. He moved differently here than in the formal spaces of the keep, less contained, though he was always contained. He crouched beside them both, and the three of them formed an accidental triangle in the cold dirt between the garden beds. "I have been watching him in the evenings. He is slow to warm to people. The household has been trying for 6 days. A pause. He responds only to you. That's attachment after a crisis. Normal behavior for an unanchored pup who bonded to a caretaker under threat." Yes, his amber eyes, steady, direct, the color of deep autumn light, found hers. It is also normal for a pup to bond with family. Denner looked at him. "My people ran bloodline markers from the shift fur," he said. "The silver-black coloring appears in the Ashvern line for 9 generations. My father had it. My younger brother Bavin had it." He stopped. "Let that sit." Bavin disappeared 6 years ago. He had recently bonded with an unregistered female. They were hiding from something. I have been looking for him since. Ash was sitting between them, looking at each of their faces in turn with a patience that was uncanny in a child, as if he understood that something important was being assembled in the air above him and was willing to wait for it. "There's more," Denner said. "The maternal line marker." He looked at her carefully, the way you approach something that might bolt. "It is Ashfall heritage." The word hit her like cold water. Ashfall, her pack, her gone pack, the one she had walked away from at 16, with a stolen herb kit and a secret she couldn't afford to have named out loud. "I left Ashfall 8 years ago," she said. "I have not been back." "I know, but you had a sister." She had. Male. 5 years older, quicker to smile, the one who had found her the night the pack elder summoned Denner to the council room and explained what they intended to use her for. Male, who had pressed the kit into her hands in the dark hallway and said, "Run, don't look back, I'll find you when it's safe." Male, who had disappeared 2 years later, from whom Denner had received 1 letter unsigned, routed through 3 different camps, that said only, "I am not dead, I am hidden, he is good. Don't look for me yet." My sister Male. The name sat differently outside her head than it had for years. She looked at Ash, at the silver-grey eyes she had been cataloguing and not letting herself name. "I thought she was dead." The silence between them was full. "If your sister bonded with my brother," the Alpha King said, "then this child is your nephew, and he is mine." Ash reached between them and put his small hand over both of theirs where they rested on the ground. Deliberate, completely certain. She told him everything that night. She was a bond reader, not a hedge healer with good plant knowledge and lucky instincts. A bond reader, a wolf born with the ability to see and feel the invisible threads connecting pack members, the living lattice of every bond that existed between wolves. She could feel where bonds were strong, where they frayed, where they had snapped entirely. In the camps, she had spent 8 years quietly mending the frayed ones, touching a dying wolf's hand and holding the thread of their pack bond in place until their body could rally, and telling no one what she was actually doing. Because bond readers were not merely uncommon, they were hunted. The ability to read bonds could theoretically be turned the other way, to sever them. The right kind of pack lord given a bond reader could unravel an entire rival pack's connection to each other, could leave them isolated, weakened, without the anchor that made a wolf's shift survivable. Certain bloodright practitioners had been experimenting with exactly this for 30 years. One of them was named Solveth. He led a coalition to the south and east. He had been looking for Denner since a border camp healer in Ashfall territory saw what she actually was and sold the information for pack protection 3 years ago. He found out what a bond reader's capacity does to bloodright energy, she said. He believes he can use it to manufacture false bonds, to create wolves bonded not to each other but to him, loyal without choice, connected without concussion. She paused. The corrupted wolves in the camps, the ones that come through the eastern border looking wrong. That is what he's been building. The fire had burned low. Outside, the first real snow of the season was starting. She could hear the quality of the silence change, the muffled hush that came with snowfall. If I shift, Denner said, he will feel it. Bond readers in full shift are visible to practitioners at distance. Something about the resonance. I have not shifted in 8 years because I cannot afford to be found. She looked at her hands. The tremor was there in her fingers, very slight, the one that showed up now in the mornings before she had managed to press it down. I am aware that I am running out of time before the suppression fails on its own. My body was not built to hold itself in 2 pieces indefinitely. Then stop holding it. His voice was quiet, not an order, not a request either, something between them. Shift here. My bond is strong enough to anchor you while you find your footing. If Solveth locates you, when he does, he finds you inside Ironhold with 5,000 wolves between him and you. He has scouts in 3 packs within a day's travel. None of them within a day's travel of Ironhold that my patrols have not already identified. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, amber eyes, direct and steady. You have spent 8 years taking care of every wolf who crossed your path and accepting nothing back. I am not asking you to accept me. I am asking you to accept the simple fact that you do not have to do this alone. She sat with that for a long time. The snow came down outside, quiet and patient. Tomorrow, she said. The clearing behind the keep was ringed by ironwood trees, old enough that their bark had gone silver-grey. Dawn light came through them in pale columns. The ground was covered in an inch of new snow. Caston had already shifted. His wolf was enormous, black as deep water, with that controlled, dangerous quality that his human form carried too, the sense of something vast held carefully in check. He stood at the center of the clearing and watched her come. Ash was at the tree line in Net's arms. Net had arrived with a blanket and the expression of a woman who had seen stranger things and would not be moved by spectacle. The boy was watching with those silver-grey eyes wide and serious, his entire small body radiating an attention that felt like held breath. Denner stood at the edge of the snow and closed her eyes. The thing about suppression is that it works right up until it doesn't. 8 years had taught her the exact shape of the cage she had built inside herself, every bolt and seam of it, every place she reinforced when the pressure got bad. She knew it like she knew the inside of her herb kit, item, by feel in the dark. She let go of the bolts one at a time. It was not like drowning. It was not like being torn apart, though she had expected that. It was like a fist she had been holding for 8 years, slowly opening, and the pain of the release was nothing compared to the sudden, impossible relief of the unclenching. The bond reader's sight came in first, the way it always did when she stopped suppressing. The golden threads, visible now, real now, the living web of connection between every wolf in range. Ash's bond, frayed but present, reaching toward Caston's black wolf with the tentative hope of something that had nearly given up, and Caston's bond, enormous and ancient, radiating from him like heat from a forge, reaching toward her with a want that was not desperate but was not patient either. Her wolf came free. The shift moved through her the way a struck bell moves through metal, a resonance that started at the center and traveled outward to every edge. When it finished, she was standing on 4 legs, and the world was everything she had been keeping herself from. The smell of each individual pine needle, the heartbeat of a field mouse under the snow 40 feet away, the texture of cold against each hair of her coat. She looked down at her own paws. The bond threads she could always see were visible now not as secondary sight but as light coming off her own fur, a faint warm gold that filtered through the snow like light through winter water. Not a white wolf, something else, A bond wolf, the old texts would have said. She was not afraid. Castan's wolf crossed the snow in 3 strides and touched his forehead to hers. The bond completed. It was not a ceremony, and it was not a door swinging open. It was more like recognizing a word you had always known, but never said aloud. The word had always meant something, and now the meaning and the sound were finally in the same place. Ash pulled free of Net's arms with total conviction and crossed the snow on bare feet, not running, walking with the certainty of someone who knows exactly where they are going. He stopped between them, looked at Denna's wolf, looked at Castan's wolf. Then he sat down in the snow and put one small hand on each of their noses simultaneously, like he was completing a circuit. His shift came. It should not have. He was too young, too recently recovered, too recently unanchored. But the bond web between her and Castan had built something in the clearing that was larger than either of them alone. A stability so deep that Ash's wolf simply found the shape it had always been trying to reach. A small silver-black pup, half the size a wolf ought to be, with ears too large for his head and paws he hadn't grown into yet. He sat between them in the snow and yipped once, high and surprised, and then shook his ears and looked up at them both, with the triumphant uncertainty of someone who had just done something they weren't entirely sure was possible. From the tree line, Net said something that was half prayer and half considerably less reverent. Solvath's force arrived at the eastern border before dawn the next morning. 400 wolves, corrupted bond workers in the advance column. Solvath himself, who had spent 20 years in rituals that had enlarged him and hollowed him at the same time, traveling behind them in a reinforced cart because the ritual degradation had taken his legs 2 years ago. He had felt her shift. He had come. The Alpha King's army assembled in the cold pre-dawn with the synchronized efficiency of years of drilling. The sound of it, footsteps and breathing and the low-frequency resonance of thousands of heartbeats in proximity, was something Denna felt in her sternum like a second pulse. She sent Ash to stay with Net. He looked at her with silver-grey eyes that were not afraid exactly, but measuring, calculating her truthfulness about returning. "I will come back," she told him. He did not speak, but he pressed his forehead to hers in the way she had seen him do with Castan, and then stepped back and let Net take his hand. Solvath had not aimed for the keep. He had sent his corrupted wolves around the flanks, toward the outcast camps on the valley's eastern edge, her people, the ones with no pack walls, no armored guard, no resource except the fact that Denna had been passing through their camps since before they knew her name. The nearest camp was burning when she arrived with a company of 50 royal wolves. But they had not scattered. The outcast wolves had organized. Not as a pack, they had no alpha, no hierarchy, no bond structure, but as a community that had been looking after itself for years and knew by reflex what to do when something came for them. Fighters at the perimeter, healers with the wounded at the center, children in the stone storage shelter Denna had helped reinforce 2 winters ago with salvaged timber. A woman named Korra, who had lost 3 fingers to a trap and whom Denna had taught to wrap a wound one-handed, was standing at the shelter door with an axe and the expression of someone who has decided she is not moving. "You brought people," Korra said. "They brought themselves." Denna looked at the 50 wolves behind her. "Let's work." They evacuated in 3 hours. Wounded on stretchers, elderly on shoulders, children who had never once in their lives been protected by anyone shepherded by wolves who had never before considered themselves a pack. Solvath found her 2 miles from the valley wall. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent 2 decades carving himself into something other than what he had been and had paid for it with everything that made him recognizable. Enlarged in the wrong places, the architecture of ambition without a body built to hold it. He traveled in the reinforced cart and spoke from it with the practiced authority of someone who had been obeyed. For so long they no longer distinguished between being obeyed and being right. Denna of Ashfall, his voice had a worn quality, like a word repeated so many times it had stopped conveying meaning. You have made this considerably more expensive than it needed to be. She looked at him. She thought about the camps. She thought about Ash's cold hands at the ward circle threshold. She thought about the way ironwort smelled, and what it cost her body to keep her wolf buried, and the tools that had been left beside her bed on the first morning by someone who had noticed what was missing. She let her power come. Not a shift, something else. The bond reader going fully active was not a wolf on 4 legs. It was the golden threads becoming visible to everyone in range simultaneously, every wolf suddenly able to see the web of connection they had always moved through without being able to see it. The outcast wolves behind her, who had no pack bond, who had lived feeling unbonded and adrift for years, saw their connections to each other for the first time. It was not magic, it was information, it was the truth of what they already were, made visible. They shifted together, not with the military precision of a trained pack, with the particular cohesion of people who had been surviving by looking after each other for years and had simply been given the language to name what they were. 300 wolves, none of them soldiers, all of them steady. Solvath looked at the golden light and at the wolves and at Denna standing in the center of it. His face did something complicated and brief, the expression of a man who has run a calculation and found the answer he least wanted. He had spent 20 years building toward this, and in the last moment he could see every place the foundation had been wrong. The battle was not long. She went to him after, when his soldiers had scattered or surrendered and the field was quiet, and Solvath was sitting in the snow with his hands open, the ritual degradation already finishing what the battle had not. She sat beside him because she always sat beside people in this kind of moment, regardless of what they had chosen. "Where are they?" she said. "My sister, Bavin Ashvern." He looked up at her. His eyes, underneath everything the rituals had done, were brown and tired and very old. The old Ashfall way station, East Ridge, base of the 2nd elevation. Bavan found it 6 years ago. A pause. His breath was labored. "Your sister is good to him. Better than someone who chose exile for love had any reason to be." He looked at his hands. "I only wanted to matter to something. I handled the wanting badly." She stayed until his breathing stopped. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was simply the thing she had always done. The bone-deep instinct that said a person deserved not to die alone, regardless of what they had chosen with their life. They found Mael and Bavin at dawn. The way station was built into the ridge, half cave and half structure, the entrance hidden by 20 years of overgrowth. Caston went in first. Denna heard from outside the exact moment he saw his brother. A sharp inhale, brief and controlled, and then silence, and then the sounds of 2 people who had given up on each other arriving back at the same place. Mael came out into the morning light with her arms already open. Thinner. Grey at the temples, which Denna hadn't expected, though she should have. 8 years was 8 years in a person's face, whether you witnessed it or not. She had the same eyes, the same particular set of jaw that meant she was holding something together by determination. The same hands that had pressed the kit into Denna's arms in a dark hallway and said, "Run." Denna held on to her and said nothing, because there was nothing that covered 8 years in one embrace. You couldn't do it. You could only stand there until the shaking stopped. "Ash," Mael said against her shoulder, "you found him." "He found me, he found us." Mael pulled back and looked at her. The same inventory look, the same cataloguing of survival, the scars, the steadiness, the faint gold light still visible under her skin from the shift. "You let it out," Mael said. "I ran out of reasons not to." Mael looked past her to where Caston stood with Bavin, the 2 brothers in the early light with the particular silence of men relearning how to exist near each other after too long apart. She looked at the bond between Denna and Caston, barely visible to her non-reader eyes but present, the gold thread running between them clear even at this distance. "Tell me about him," Mael said. "Not Bavin, Caston." Denna considered. "He left ironwort beside my bed on the first morning," she said. "My kit had run out. He noticed." Mael smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had also once fallen in love with someone via a practical gesture in a difficult moment and knew exactly what that looked like from the inside. "Then you're finished." "I know." Ash spoke for the first time 3 days after Mael and Bavin arrived at Ironhold. He was sitting with Denna in the herb room, both of them occupied, she cataloguing, he arranging dried stems into patterns on the floor with the private logic of a child's architecture. Mael and Bavin were in the courtyard, relearning the dimensions of each other after years of the waystation. Caston was in the war room sorting the aftermath of Solvath's campaign. Ash paused in his arrangement, looked up at her. "Den," he said, small voice rough from disuse, precise and deliberate. She stopped breathing. He said it again, quieter, as if testing the way it fit in his mouth. "Den." He looked at her with those silver-grey eyes and waited to see what she did with it. She put down the catalogue. She crossed the 3 feet of floor between them and sat in the dried stems and the scattered patterns and pulled him into her arms and held on, and for a long time neither of them moved. His second word came a week later. The Alpha King was crossing the courtyard after a long day's work, coat dusted with snow from the northern wall inspection, and Ash was sitting on the courtyard steps waiting for precisely no one. When Caston stopped at the foot of the steps, Ash looked up at him with the calm estimation he brought to everything. "Stay," said Ash. Caston went very still. Denna felt it through the bond from inside the herb room. Not words, just the shape of it, the particular quality of a man being addressed by something enormous in a very small voice and not knowing what to do with his hands. He sat down on the step beside Ash. Ash immediately settled against his side with the absolute confidence of a child who has decided a person is a safe thing to lean on and is prepared to stake considerable weight on that decision. Caston put one scarred hand lightly on the boy's back and looked out at the snow coming down in the courtyard, and Denna watched from the doorway and did not say anything because some things were too complete to need language added to them. The winter clinic opened in the east wing on the first morning of deep snow. Denna had designed it herself, stone walls, good eastern light, shelving at 3 heights, a separate space for children where the ceiling was painted the soft blue of summer sky. Above the entrance, someone carved a line in the old territory tongue. She didn't know who. It appeared one morning, clean-cut and careful in the stone. Translated, "Here a wolf's need is the only measure." On the first morning the clinic opened, Caston arrived with food wrapped in cloth that was still warm from Net's kitchen. He leaned against the doorway and watched her inventory supplies. "Net says you didn't eat before you came down," he said. "I had things to set up." "You always have things to set up." He held out the wrapped cloth. Their fingers touched when she took it. The bond hummed at the contact, present, constant, no longer something she braced against, but simply something she lived in the way you live in your own skin without thinking about it. He stayed while she worked. He read her supply list over her shoulder and made suggestions she half ignored, and when the first patient arrived, one of the former outcast wolves, new to the pack, uncertain, holding a child's arm at the angle that meant a clean fracture, she moved and he stepped aside, and the clinic became what it had always been meant to be. He was still at the door when she looked up between patients. She thought about a ward stone burning blue. She thought about 11 hours on the road with an empty kit and no food, and her wolf pressed down so hard she could feel it against her spine like a held breath. She thought about a small boy's cold hands and a name said in a rough voice for the first time, and a man sitting down on cold steps because a child had said one word, and tools laid out on a table by someone who had noticed what was missing without being asked. Outside, the snow came down the way it always came, quiet and patient, without asking anyone's permission. The ironwort in the jar on the window ledge leaned toward the morning light, the way growing things do.